On today's episode, I talked with Brendan. Brendan has a popular YouTube channel called MasterTalk. In that channel, he tells people how to be better public speakers, how to be better communicators. He has 3 daily exercises you can do to become a better communicator, to become a better public speaker. And we go into a lot of that today on today's podcast episode. We talk about what it's like to be a communicator as a leader. We talk about what it's like to have a different personality set and how you can mirror that in your communication style, or even change that in your communication style, depending on, if you're a visionary, an integrator, CEO, COO. So I really enjoyed talking with Brendan, and I hope you enjoyed the episode.
So it's the same principle here. It's all about thinking about what are we prioritizing in the information that we're sharing. And if we focus that idea of prioritization in our messaging, we can pluck out the best pieces that are working and reuse them every time.
Hey everyone, we are here with Brendan. Brendan is founder and president of MasterTalk. He's a YouTuber, a coach, and thanks for being here with me, Brendan.
Hey, the pleasure's mine, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, perfect. So first off, what was the process behind starting this YouTube channel, MasterTalk?
For sure. So it was mostly an accident. When I went to college, I was in business school and I did these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing basketball or soccer or some other thing you probably wouldn't see me playing, I did presentations competitively. And that's how I learned how to communicate. But then as I got older, Tyler, I started coaching a lot of the students in college, mostly so they could win these competitions too. And I accidentally got good at coaching people how to speak. And that's what led to the YouTube channel, because I felt that everything that I was sharing with the students wasn't available for free. And I just didn't expect it to be what it is today.
Nice. And so that brings up the question of kind of where did you learn to be so good at it?
And that was the question that sparked MasterTalk, actually. So when I was in my last semester of college, at this point I'd coached like 60 people on communication, all for free, by the way. I didn't even know you get paid to be a coach. And then somebody asked me that very same question. Brendan, how did you learn how to speak? And I asked him, what do you mean? He said, well, did you hire a coach? Did you do Toastmasters? Did you watch YouTube videos? And the truth is, Tyler, I actually didn't do any of these. I'm mostly self-taught. The only 2 things I did do was watch a bunch of TED Talks online while I was eating lunch for 3 years. So I'd probably watch hundreds at this point. And the second piece is the peer group. Because everyone in that case competition program is a really good speaker, when I was coaching them, they were also giving me feedback on how I could get better at speaking. So we're kind of just teaching each other without much direction. So that's actually how I learned how to speak.
Cool. Wow, that's awesome. And so, I mean, obviously would you say that if you had been, I don't know, 3 years ago or whenever you kind of started down this route, if you had this YouTube channel of yours, MasterTalk, to watch, do you feel like you would have sped up that process? Or do you think it really does take time, like 3 years of watching TED Talks or MasterTalk, to get good at it?
I definitely think part of it would have been sped up for sure. And that's really the goal of MasterTalk, is to speed it up for people after me. But for the level that I got in communication, it definitely took time. I think for someone who's getting started, who just wants to be good, I mean, MasterTalk will speed that up really, really quickly. But if you want to be like world-class exceptional, it does take time to get there, kind of like being a world-class basketball player. And I still got a long ways to go. Yeah,
awesome. Well, perfect. So, I mean, one tip that I've heard you mention, could you just kind of describe what is the random word exercise?
Yeah, for sure, Tyler. So let's start with the context first. Communication's like juggling 18 balls at the same time, right? One ball is body language, one is storytelling, one is facial expression, and it can get really confusing really fast. Yeah. So for me, the question has always been, what are the 3 easiest balls to juggle so we can build momentum? And the first ball is exactly what you had mentioned, the random word exercise, which is essentially this. You pick a random word like tissue box, like pistachios, like trophy case, and you create random presentations out of thin air. And the reason why this is effective is for 2 reasons. One, it helps you think quickly on your feet, which helps you with small talk or just in general. And reason number 2, if you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything.
I love it. That's awesome. And I think it does give you, I don't know, I feel like what I've noticed is like a lot of successful entrepreneurs and maybe even salespeople kind of have that skill. My partner and I always talk about it as like just being able to BS kind of thing. Like, just any question that comes their way, like even if they don't know the answer, they'll kind of BS their way through it. So have you noticed in your kind of coaching business, like, do you help people? I don't know. Do you help certain groups of people, like, salespeople more often or entrepreneurs more often? Who are you really teaching?
Yeah, great question, Tyler. And this is something I didn't really know when I started either. And the key here is there's actually a big, big, big difference between someone who watches my free content and who actually invests in communication coaching. It's a very different category of people. So let's say we
Yeah.
take the YouTube channel, which is something I didn't know when I started, by the way. So let's say my YouTube channel, there's a lot of students, let's say, or people who don't have a lot of money who will actually
Yeah.
sit there and binge 75 videos because they actually have a lot more time than they have money, which is totally fine because I was there 6 years ago.
Yeah.
But to the person who actually buys my services, usually how this works is they'll go to my YouTube channel just for credibility's sake. They might watch 1 or 2 videos and they go, okay, that's nice, but I'd rather just hire the guy who's talking.
Yeah.
So they just hire me directly. And it turns out that those people are individuals who want to speed up time. So their money is less valuable than their time. So executives of companies, where their company is usually paying it for them, so they don't have to pay it out of pocket. It's entrepreneurs who are already successful and coaches like me, but in different niches, like career coaching or something.
So one question that I've had for you, I've watched a few of your videos, and one of them, I think you talked about, here's some of the top speakers in the world, like Gary Vee or Tony Robbins, and like, here's kind of their style. So one question I have for you, do you feel like you have a certain style of presenting or communication? And like, I don't know, is there even a science behind that? Like, these are all the different ways you can communicate, like authoritative or, whatever. Is there a science behind that?
For sure. And you probably would have known, but it's just my video hasn't come out yet on style. It's coming out in like 2 months or something.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah, so how it works, Tyler, is, and this is actually new thought leadership I came up with this year, is really around 2 things. One, it's understanding that time is the best indicator of style as long as you start. So when I started my YouTube channel as an example, I didn't know what I was doing. People can go watch my first video. I'm literally on my mother's couch and I have no phone, I have no money. I'm just like, hi, I'm MasterTalk. And now it's a lot more clean.
Yeah.
But the time component helps me speed up style. And then now I figure out my own voice. I'm a lot more comfortable on a podcast. I definitely wasn't comfortable like this 3 years ago. And I started guesting on shows. Terrible. That's why you were asking me earlier, why do you do this? Oh, practice. Like, I just like talking. It just helps me. But the other piece, though, Tyler, is there's actually a science to this. Well, not a science, but a formula that helps you figure out style, which is simply this. Pick 3 speakers you really admire and ask yourself what is the one quality you want from each of those speakers. So let's say Gary Vee, because he's on my goal sheet. So for him, the one thing I want from him is not really his aggressive vocal tones, his over-the-top personality, which in his case isn't over-the-top. This is natural way of being, because I've studied him probably more than most people. But the piece is that he has that I want is relatability. Doesn't matter if he's talking to a 6-year-old girl who watches him on TikTok or a 60-year-old man. They all love him.
Yeah.
And I think that's really fascinating. And this conversation also helps me with relatability. So that's one. Then let's say Seth Godin is his ability to package ideas. He's just so good at using analogies to present information we already know in a way that makes you think. You go, huh. And then the third one is Scott Harrison. Present as if your life is on the line. Where if he doesn't do a good job, he's the CEO and founder of the nonprofit Charity Water. Well, if he doesn't do a great job, people die. Like he doesn't raise money for charity. So yeah, that's how you build style.
Wow, that's awesome. And so, I mean, with that, like you have kind of these 3 people. How long does it take to kind of adapt? I mean, obviously, I'm sure it's a long process to perfect it, but is it easy for you to kind of switch styles? Even, mid-speech, like, can you switch over to, oh, this is my Gary Vee kind of voice?
Fascinating question, Tyler. I love these. I actually haven't been asked a lot of these, so I love it. So there's a couple points that I'll mention. The questions you're asking me a little bit more for advanced people. So let's start with the beginning, then let's work our way up to the top. So let's say we start the random word exercise. If people aren't doing that 5 minutes a day, oh my God, don't even worry about style. It's not even worth talking about because you're not doing that consistently. Same thing with the 2 other balls, which are quickly the question drill and the video messages, which are simply question drills mean, are we answering a question about our expertise every day for 5 minutes? where we just write out the answer. That's how I got really good at answering questions. And video messages, which is you pick 3 people you love every day, you send them a video message. It's simple,
Nice.
but nobody does it.
Yeah.
So then talking about style. So I would say now the key idea becomes, okay, so now we've done all these exercises. We're working on style. We're trying to figure this. So now the question becomes, can we switch styles? So there's actually a strategy that's really advanced that people can do. Though if you're not doing the first 3, you probably won't do this, but I'll share it. What I teach clients to do is we pick their 3 speakers and we take a transcript from that speaker's speech and we force the client to present that speech as if they were Tony Robbins.
Okay.
And that's how their people are able to shape shift styles really fast.
Yeah. Gotcha. Wow. Fascinating. And I love the question drill. Obviously, each 3 I'm sure have their different reasons of why they're important, but I personally love the question drill just because I guess I'm speaking more to like business owners, founders, just because it does kind of help you poke holes into your own ideas and into your, methodologies, assumptions that you have, right? That like, oh, this will be successful, or, oh, I'm totally right on this. But like, if you're in that habit of asking questions, it goes back to another phrase I've heard recently of like being a learn-it-all versus a know-it-all. Like if you're a learn-it-all, you're constantly asking questions, right?
I love that. I love that concept. I've never heard of that. That's really good. And yeah. I love the other point as well. As CEOs and founders, we always want to question our ideas. That's why I love it when hosts disagree with me, because it gives me an opportunity to make my thought leadership better than where it was yesterday. And there's always something I learn from the host. And to your point, the learn it all mindset, which I've never heard before, which I love, is the idea, to simplify that even more, to make the world your teacher. So when you make the world your teacher, you start to learn new insights about your industry that your competitors haven't thought of.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm going to tie this in, kind of later on. But with that, I feel like excellent communicators are typically slower to, I guess, anger. Like, I feel like they're typically better at making things, like if there's opposition, right, to their ideas. I feel like good communicators are better at making it a discussion versus like an argument or like a heated argument, right? Would you agree with that? Like if you're good at communicating, you're better at, I don't know, controlling the tempo of the conversation and avoiding that heat?
Right. I think what you're talking about is mostly around the idea of tonality. So I think what great speakers do is they might communicate the same information that a good one would, but they won't communicate it. They'll communicate rather in a way that doesn't cause an emotional visceral reaction from the person they're speaking with. So there's a very big difference between, hey, Tyler, we need to get Chinese food today versus, hey, Tyler, I'm thinking Chinese food today. They got a special and they got your favorite egg rolls there. I think we should go to get Chinese. So notice how it's the same information. I'm still getting what I want, which is Chinese food. But the tonality of how I'm approaching that conversation is very different. And that's one of many facets, but that's the easy way to think about it.
Because, I mean, a big thing there is like your audience, right? What's your audience going to respond to? Do they like the authoritative approach, or do they like the compromise? Do they like the, more diplomatic approach?
I'll give you a bonus tip. What I'm doing right now is an example of that. So my tone is actually being adjusted slowly to the host that I'm speaking to, because the best communicators are chameleons. You'll notice throughout this whole conversation, my tone has been on the lower side, and that's not an accident, because you're more on the introverted side. Whereas sometimes I get interviewed by somebody who's like really, really loud, and this is actually my natural tone. I just know that's overwhelming, so I changed the tone.
Got to match the tone. That's cool.
Yeah.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, so perfect. So I mean, we've already touched on this a little bit, but I mean, let's go in a little bit to leadership and to, I guess, specifically to business owners becoming leaders. So is there one question I have, thinking for myself as a business owner, is there a big difference in skill when you're presenting versus communicating one-on-one? Like, are those two different ball games?
I think of it more like a multiplier effect. So if you get better at one, you get better at all of them slowly but surely. Example, if we do the random word exercise once, okay. But if we do the random word exercise 200 times, we get very versatile in our ability to convey small talk. Question drills. Sure, does that help us with questioning our ideas, to your point? Yes, absolutely. But it also helps us on sales calls. So first, an entrepreneur selling a product or service, and we ran that question drill gamut in the context of our sales call and our products. We're bulletproof. Like, there isn't a
Yeah.
time where I get on a sales call and I'm nervous. It just doesn't make sense. Because if you've done the question, you're selling the same product like
Right.
500 times, it becomes a joke. But the crux here, where the rubber meets the road, Tyler, is most people aren't willing to start with step one, which is, are we booking 15 minutes in our calendar to just do the video messages, the question drills, and the random word exercise? And that's what ultimately builds our skill set for the other areas of comms.
Gotcha. That makes a ton of sense. Well, so going into, again, speaking of business owners, are you familiar with Visionary Integrator, kind of that rocket fuel book?
Yeah, Gino stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, in this quick break, I wanted to give a shout out to Coconut VA. They are making this podcast possible. This podcast is hosted by me, but a lot of the back-end work is actually done by a Coconut VA. I'm the co-founder of Coconut VA, and we find Filipino virtual assistants for US companies. So if you've got a proven business model, you're growing, you need help with operations, general admin, lead generation, or really any help around the business, you could probably hire a Coconut VA. You can find a link on my podcast page, thebtspodcast.com, or at coconutva.com. My podcast is a great example of how Coconut VA could help you. I've done the work to systematize my podcast, systematize the production process, and now I can bring in a Coconut VA to actually execute that process. If you're ready to delegate tasks, you're ready to hire a Coconut VA. Yeah, and so I guess one question I have is, should both roles, kind of like CEO, COO, visionary integrator, should both roles be equally invested in becoming excellent communicators, or should you only invest in the, more the public facing guy or girl?
I love that question. That's actually sparking an idea for a YouTube channel that I have to write down after this podcast is over.
Perfect.
But yes. So the answer is absolutely, but the reason for both is actually different. So let's say we take the CEO of a company and the COO. So for the CEO, they want to become an exceptional communicator because even if they don't want it to be just the necessary act of being CEO, the title just comes with the job. Your personal brand affects the company's performance, especially at scale. So we need to realize that as the visionary, you have a responsibility to communicate your vision constantly, frequently, and all the time. Right? Whenever you're selling a key employee to work for you, whenever you're selling investors to put money into you, or when you're pitching your startup. But for the ops guy or gal of the business, it still matters because how you efficiently create SOPs, how you communicate those expectations to employees, and how you manage the back end of the business requires really sharp communication. But the purpose becomes different. You don't really have to show up on a podcast if you don't want to. You don't really have to show up in a pitch situation, but you're going to be in those key investor meetings and having those one-on-one small talk conversations, and you definitely want to convey the same level of excellence that the CEO does at the very minimum in smaller settings or internally.
Gotcha. Love it. Perfect. Well, awesome. So kind of going along with that, with more of the visionary, with more of the CEO, I feel like with their personality, I feel like it's more, type A usually. And like you said, I'm an introvert. I'm more the COO. So this is not necessarily for me, but for people that are more, visionary-esque, do you have any advice to them to make it, I guess, how does it work when they're trying to not come across too strong? Like you said, you adjusted yourself to my voice. Like, how are there any exercises that you do to help somebody give off the right vibe in the right scenarios?
Yeah, for visionaries specifically, what I like to say, Tyler, is I use analogies that they understand. I apply the same rationale and the principles to communication. Example, the best CEOs of any industry are customer obsessed, like Jeff Bezos is from Amazon. Right? So he's really focused on that. But the analogy that I would draw is the same way that we're obsessed with the every little detail of the customer experience, we need to apply that same level of granularity to the communication experience that we're conveying to the people around us. And oftentimes there's a disconnect between the level of effort and quality in those experiences. So it's not really like a silver bullet tip for that specific audience you're touching on.
Yeah.
It's more of a conversation around saying, okay, how obsessed are you with your customer? Oh yeah, like I'm doing these 100 calls, I'm having dinner with them, I'm like, okay, are we applying that same level of focus to our communication? Because you're talking to all your customers in 1 hour versus having
Yeah.
one-on-one conversation. And then they realize, which ultimately leads to the same conclusion, I need to put in more time, I need to put in more effort, I need to ask more questions for a different outcome, which isn't just getting the sale anymore, but rather making sure that my brand and the way I'm communicating that brand is aligned with my key customer.
Gotcha. Perfect. And so going back to something you've already mentioned, these three main exercise, these three main balls that you need to juggle when it comes to communication. Is that kind of catch-all advice? Like if anybody wants to be a better communicator, start in these three areas.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you caught on to that. And the reason I do that for visionary CEOs looking to be on podcasts themselves, because that's like a meta tip, is what I'm always asking myself is the idea of prioritization. Because there's three parts to communication, as per my definition. The first one, Tyler, is are people listening to our ideas? That's part one. Part two is are people taking action on our ideas? And finally, part three is are people sharing our ideas with the world because they took action, they're so good that they want to give it to other people. And oftentimes people focus too much on the part one of the definition and not two and three. So when I guested on podcast 3 years ago, I sucked. Like I would just answer every question as they would come and people would be left with all the right answers.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't do anything with it. So it's the same principle here, is it's all about thinking about what are we prioritizing in the information that we're sharing, whether it's in a podcast, whether it's in a meeting, or whether it's in a sales call. And if we focus that idea of prioritization in our messaging, we can pluck out the best pieces that are working and reuse them every time.
Gotcha. Wow, that's cool. Perfect. Okay, so one kind of maybe oddball question, I don't know, hopefully you've never gotten this one before, but do you feel like you're obviously more expert than most at communicating. Do you feel like it's been a struggle for you to know, I guess, your inner preferences? Because I feel like with this kind of random word exercise, you can give a presentation on anything. You could probably take a viewpoint on anything and convince other people of the merit of your ideas, right? So have you struggled with that at all? Like, okay, well, what do I actually believe? Because I can take, the viewpoint anywhere.
Fascinating question, Tyler. Here's what I would say. I would say you're right in the sense that I've gotten to a place in my career where I can definitely make sense out of nonsense. Like I could take anything and throw the ball. I think for me, the question that you're driving upon, I believe, is really what's my next level? Like what's the next level of my growth? Because if I go back to that point of view that I might have around the random word, it's like going, okay, well, what do I actually believe about this? So I think there's two parts to that. One is my perspective on the random word. Two is like, what's the vision for my own communication skill?
Yeah.
Because there's an answer there too. The first piece is the random word exercise doesn't really matter in terms of the content. The main goal is for people to get out of their shell. So for example, if you get really versatile, you're just a lot less fearful when uncertain moments happen in the business or in general. So let's say you wake up one morning, you get on this massive podcast, you're not freaking out and crying. You're going like, okay, I've done the random word exercise enough times. I can figure this out. So it's kind of like, this is a principle we teach in our ecosystem. The more you sweat in the gym, the less you bleed in the war, right? So it's the same. It's the same game here. In terms of the vision for myself, I think the way that I've decided to push myself, because you're right, I'm getting a little bit comfortable, is really through coaching people who are really, really good. So I coach a lot of some of the best speakers in the world. Not all of them, obviously, but a good number. So they push me to keep getting better, else they don't want to coach with me anymore. So that's the way I push myself.
Yeah, nice. I don't know if you would want to do this or somebody else would, but I think even a fun like TikTok journey would be to film yourself 5 minutes every day doing that random word exercise and just document to anybody, like, oh, I'd love to hear what his thoughts are on a paperclip today. Could be good. So, that came out of a question I have. Is this random word exercise, is this just you by yourself talking to the wall, or are you trying to present it to someone?
You got it. So in reality, the ideal situation is you're doing it with somebody else.
Okay.
But a lot of people don't have that accountability. They either can't afford a coach or they can't find somebody in their network who wants to do the random word exercise, which in my opinion, they're not trying hard enough, if I'm being honest. But to make it easy for people to implement, yes, even if you're just doing it with yourself, it's at least you're doing it. Like for me, done is better than perfect. That's
Right.
really the key. And another piece of advice I have for people who have kids who might not be this audience, but for those of you listening who might have kids, get them to do it. So have them give you a random word and you give them a random word when you're picking them to and from school. And that's an easy way to integrate that into your life.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a great tip. Perfect. All right. So kind of my last question for this episode, what is the role of listening in your kind of teachings? Like, where does that fall in as a priority? Like, you have these first 3 exercises that are all about you kind of speaking. Where does the listening part come in?
Yep, absolutely. So of course, listening is super important. It's just hard to teach. So here's the way that I think about it. Listening is super key, and there's a specific strategy around it. Because the challenge I've had with podcasts I've listened to is they just go, well, listening's important. It's like, well, what do you do with this? Okay, we got 2 years and 1 mouth for a reason. You got to listen twice as much as you say, I got it. Yeah. So here's an exercise people can take home to the bank. I call this statements versus questions. So whenever we wake up every morning, Tyler, the question we need to ask ourselves is, yesterday, how many questions versus statements did I give out in the world? And most people, when they communicate ideas, it's often statement, 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 statement. Meaning, I believe this, well, I believe this, well, I think this, well, I think this. So it's a ping-ponging of statements. Whereas what the best communicators on the planet do, which I didn't do a great job of today because I got to add value to your audience, but if it was just me and you talking, it would be statement, question, question. Statement, question,
Right.
question. So let's say you go, I believe this. Well, I would say, why do you believe this? Why is that important to you? What is a perspective that you feel I'm missing in my thought process? So these are the questions that automatically make you a better listener. So just ask more questions. Simple as that.
Love it. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brendan. This has all been fantastic. I feel like we have a lot of actionable things to do. These first 3 exercises. If you want to be a better communicator, start there. And so do you have any other advice, tips, or tricks you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, for sure, Tyler. And thanks for having me. This is great. So I would say that the closing remark is simply a question. How would your life change if you're an exceptional communicator? A lot of people think that communication is a chore. Oh, look, I don't want to get better at doing the dishes. Whereas the truth is that communication allows us to impact people's lives. So I encourage people to dream about their communication in the same way they might dream about their business, their career, or their life, because communication is about leading a fulfilling life at the end of the day.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you, Brendan. And then is there any specific call to action you'd like for the audience? Go to your YouTube channel, website, anything?
For sure, Tyler. So 2 ways to keep in touch. The first one is definitely the YouTube channel. Just go to MasterTalk in one word and you'll have access to a ton of free videos on speaking. And the second way to keep in touch is to attend one of my free communication workshops that I do over Zoom every few weeks that are live and interactive. And if you want to join that, go to rockstarcommunicator.com.
Perfect. Awesome. And I'll have those links in the description, of course. And yeah, thank you again for being here.
Of course, pleasure was mine.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Startup. If you liked the show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a review.